Tonight on Bridge City News, there's more backlash from Education Minister David Eggen threatening to bolt funding to private schools. We have the details. Carfentanil is becoming a danger not only for civilians, but for police as well. We will explain. And search and rescue workers in Northern California continue to dig through the rubble trying to find more bodies of those who perished in recent wildfires. Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. The province says it will follow through on its plan to cut funding to 28 private schools, including Christian schools, if they fail to publicly post policies affirming the rights of LGBTQ2 students. Education Minister David Eggen says in total, the schools received $32.5 million in funding from the province. The move related to cementing a student's right to start a Gay-Straight Alliance support group. The NDP tabled Bill 24 in November of last year to require all Alberta schools to adopt policies affirming the Charter and human rights of students and staff. Schools also had to post their support of GSAs prominently on their websites before June 30th, which many have not done. Joining me now via Skype is Jay Cameron with the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms. Jay, what are your thoughts on Education Minister David Eggen's strong-arm tactics?
It's not a surprise that this is happening right now. My clients have been expecting it. There's two issues with what the minister is saying. He's saying if you receive public funding, you have to follow the law. But the law is the Constitution. That's what provides the overarching framework in Canada. And the second issue is if you receive public money. The public is diverse. It's not the minister's money, it's the public's money.
Can these 28 private schools, including Christian schools, afford to lose this kind of funding?
To lose the funding, especially when they've complied with the law for the entire time that they've been in operation, and they are very safe, would be very difficult for them. So they are doing a favor to the province by educating. They're saving the province money by providing educational services. And like I said before, their schools are more safe statistically than the public schools. So it would be a loss to everybody in Alberta if they were shut down.
What is your organization doing to stand up for Christian schools?
With Bill 24, the latest is that we are at the Court of Appeal on December 3rd. And so it's going to be in front of a panel of 3 justices. And we are asking for a stay of the what we call the parental privacy provisions, which require schools to withhold information from parents. That's happening December 3rd. And then once that's heard, there will either be an appeal or we'll go back down to the lower court.
Jay Cameron with the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms. Thanks a lot for joining me today.
Thanks, Hal.
Just a small amount is all it takes to overdose on these various substances. It's shocking that a single grain of carfentanil could be so lethal. The drug, which is used to sedate elephants, has become an epidemic killer across the country. Doctors, nurses, and frontline emergency services are all at risk of exposure to the killer drug. But what about the safety of our furry responders, the police canines? Jason Walper of the Lethbridge Police Service says there is a danger for the dogs as well.
The canine dogs are at the same risk of symptoms and exposures that humans are, and certainly they can be affected in similar manners. There's a lot of conflicting information out there on whether or not dogs are affected less or even more. There has been overdoses of dogs certainly known out there. So, I mean, certainly it comes back to the handler. The biggest safety mechanism that the canine dogs have is their handler. Their handlers are trained, obviously, to recognize these types of situations, and certainly if they're going into a scene where they suspect powder fentanyl or carfentanil, certainly they're going to weigh the risk versus the reward of whether or not it's actually risk effective to send their dog in there and if it's necessary at that particular time.
Walper adds that the police are trained to assist both dogs and humans to use naloxone kits, the drug which is used to reverse the effects of opioids. Counterterrorism is always a priority when it comes to national security. The RCMP provided a specialized workshop in Red Deer, Alberta recently for first responders on key indicators of terrorist activity. Chris Griffin is a retired police constable who now focuses on training on national security, explains.
So we have an overall program. It's called the FRTAP, which simply means First Responder Terrorism Awareness Program. We give several modules in that 3-day training. We speak about terrorism awareness, violent extremism, public safety speaks often. We have guest speakers from CBSA, and then as well, we talk about Canada's national security overview. Once somebody sat through all those types of presentations, their understanding of what Canada is doing to address terrorism, their awareness has gone right up after 3 days of that.
Approximately 110 government, police, fire, and medical personnel attended the counter-terrorism workshop. A recent report says the city of Edmonton is charging millions of dollars in fines for speeding or running a red light, but only to drivers with an Alberta license plate. In fact, those photo radar and red light camera tickets translated to just over $51 million worth of revenue for Edmonton last year. Those tickets were only issued to drivers with Alberta license plates. A statement issued by the city said between January of 2017 and September of this year, close to 60,000 vehicles with out-of-province plates were recorded speeding and did not receive tickets. You want to take your family for an indoor swim tomorrow in Lethbridge? By bringing a canned good to Fitzsick, Stanciwick, or Nicholas Sharon pools, you're able to enjoy the water between 9 and 7 p.m. in support of our local food banks.
As the weather gets colder, we tend to see more individuals that use our food bank. The utility bills are higher. Just Christmas time is an expensive time of the year. A lot of the events that are hosted, and the event tomorrow, the food can go towards that, or it would also go towards our monthly hampers that we're distributing at this moment as well. We encourage people to kind of donate throughout the season. There's never a bad time or a late time to donate, so we can use them for this season, for these hampers, but also for January as well, since that's also going to be much need during those times as well, and donations tend to go down after Christmas.
The Bright Lights Festival is taking place tonight at Gull Gardens, and to celebrate, the Lethbridge Downtown BRZ has your parking covered. In conjunction with the outdoor Christmas-themed festivities is Christmas at Casa. It's a local shopping experience that has become a premier arts and crafts holiday sale with over 100 artists. In its 6th year, the diverse exhibit opens its doors tonight from 5 till 9 p.m. and tomorrow from 10 until 5.
Casa is a very user-friendly space, but many of the spaces are for artists to work in. So if you're not taking a class, or if you're not an artist working in the space, you probably don't see some of the nooks and crannies in here. And Christmas at Casa opens up the whole building so that the public is able to explore a little and maybe see just how cool it is here and what kind of art is being made here.
One local favorite is joining the lineup of artists this year, excited to launch his new Lethbridge-themed coloring book.
Folks in Lethbridge love collecting, and so I know lots of folks will be out for the 6th book, but I also have kohlrabi t-shirts, and I will have lots of pin buttons as well, including the Lethbian and Lethbridgian controversy buttons, so people can choose which button they would like, whether they see people who live here as Lethbians or Lethbridgians. You get to pick a button. There's one for each of you.
Casa says nearly 5,000 visitors are expected to stop by, where they will enjoy local musicians and a cafe. This year, Casa is accepting donations on behalf of Christmas Hope, and attendees can take advantage of the eco-wrapping station with the Helen Schuler Nature Center staff. With snow on the ground, Alberta Canola is touring the province, sharing vital information with producers. Gerard Lampeau unpacks some of the key points as the tour rolls through our region.
Scientific information versus not, etc. like that.
Choosing a better variety that is suited for that particular race of the blackleg fungus. You can pick out the right resistance genes that you need to have in your canola varieties that will fight off the disease and keep the yield there.
Agronomist Clint Yerke weighing in on one of the many challenges facing producers. Another big one as the PMRA reviews seed treatments and the possible loss of agronomic tools is the ongoing glyphosate debate.
Our regulatory bodies here in Canada, the regulatory bodies in the US, they've all found no link between cancer and glyphosate. As you mentioned, it's the most extensively studied chemistry, probably in the history of the world.
Mark Walker with CCGA echoes the sentiment of producers that losing access to existing tools will not allow farmers to feed the world. The focus switched to markets as canola has been falling over the last little while.
Harvest pressure is what's caused canola to move lower here, but also overhanging over the market is soybean ending stocks in the U.S. 955 million bushels is what USDA had suggested last week.
David Drozd with the Winnipeg-based Ag Chief says more pressure on oil seeds could come next year when the South American soybean crop is available, and if the China-U.S. trade battle is not resolved. The audience had a lot to digest.
I hope that we continue to push the science behind it and not the rhetoric. what's happened down in the United States isn't totally science-based.
Given the changes that have come from the CRA, a conversation on tax tips and traps was also on the menu.
It's not just tax, it's legal, banking, life insurance, all of those. And it may be different advisors, or it should be different advisors that use for each one of those areas to make sure that you're getting a well-rounded approach.
Stakeholders will be digesting this information for some time as Alberta Canola continues its Powering Profits tour.
There was so much diversity from all of the experts. It was so great to join. It's something I hope I can use back home at my farm as well as at work at the credit union.
Gerard Lampow, Primetime Local News.
The Powering Your Profits tour will be at the Coast Hotel in Lethbridge on November the 20th. 3 people died in a workplace accident yesterday in an industrial area in Leduc, just south of Edmonton. Police and emergency crews responded late yesterday afternoon to a call at Millennium Cryogenic Technologies. Police say 3 men were killed in the accident. Leduc Mayor Bob Young says it isn't clear yet what happened at the Leduc Business Park. The situation is contained and there's no risk to the public. The accident is being investigated by Alberta Occupational Health and Safety. A man convicted of killing 3 young men in a 2011 drunk driving crash near Edmonton has been granted day parole. Bradley Arsenal, Thaddeus Lake, and Cole Novak died in the accident in Beaumont. Jonathan Pratt, who was driving almost 200 kilometers an hour when his truck slammed into the vehicle carrying the 3 men. He had a blood alcohol level of 2.5 times the legal limit. In 2014, he was found guilty of manslaughter and impaired driving causing death. A former massage therapist in Saskatoon has been sentenced to 3 years in prison for sexual assault. Last September, Mark Donlevy was found guilty of sexually assaulting a woman who was intoxicated. The court heard that she had since been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and has trouble sleeping. She filed her complaint after 11 other women came forward alleging Donlevy sexually assaulted them during massage therapy appointments. Search and rescue workers, including many volunteers, fanned out across fire-ravaged areas in California, searching for the remains of those who perished. At least 63 people are now known dead.
We're looking for any sort of human remains, any sort of hazard that might prevent people from coming back in here. Well, you feel terrible for these people. It's been devastating for them, and I couldn't imagine coming back here if this was my home. Our hope is that if there are missing people, we can find them and bring some closure to people that need that. If we find something, we would call into our command post, our leadership, and they would send out the anthropologist teams to confirm that it's human remains, not animal remains. And at that point, we would probably call in the sheriff.
A 4th-generation resident of Paradise, California, who saved his home from the devastating wildfire, tours the destroyed town and mourns all that was lost.
Everything that was part of history was in the Gold Nugget Museum, which was part of Paradise. And everything that was part of Paradise was right here in this building. It's hard to swallow, hard to really find the words to describe having the entire town gone and devastated. My grandfather was here in 1910. Before Paradise even had power. In fact, he was born in Orville, not Paradise, because Paradise didn't even have a hospital yet. This is where the history is in this museum. There's no words to describe what myself and a lot of people are going to be going through in this. I can't find the words. It's terrible.
Migrants in a caravan of Central Americans have arrived by the hundreds in Tijuana, Mexico, just south of San Diego, California. Many made their way to a shelter to line up for food. Doctors checked over many who were suffering from colds and other ailments. The bulk of the main caravan, however, is still 1,800 kilometers from the border. Many say they will seek asylum in the United States, while others say they will cross illegally. A U.S. federal judge has ordered the Trump administration to immediately reinstate CNN reporter Jim Acosta's credentials so that he may cover the White House. U.S. District Court Judge Timothy Kelly, an appointee of U.S. President Trump, announced his decision following a hearing in Washington today. The judge said Acosta's credentials would be returned and reactivated to allow him access to the White House. CNN asked for Acosta's credentials to be restored, while a lawsuit over his credentials being revoked goes forward. Following the ruling, the White House says it would temporarily reinstate Acosta's access privileges. The White House revoked Acosta's credentials after he and Trump clashed during a news conference last week. Rare twin manatees named Millennium and Falcon were released back to their home in the Florida Keys. They were found 2 years ago after their mother was accidentally killed by a boat strike.
Every manatee life is precious. These two are the offspring of a very well-known manatee named Bonnie that Dolphin Research Center and other people have been helping for many years. So when she was killed by a boat strike, the fact that we were able to help her twins, get them to safety, and that now that they've grown up and are ready to be released to really support their entire species, it means a lot to the species and it means a lot to us.
That's great to see. A new Christian movie is set to hit the big screen soon called Unbroken Path of Redemption. The film stars the late Billy Graham's grandson, Will Graham. We asked Reverend Graham what it was like portraying his famous grandfather.
It's interesting, they didn't want me to preach just like that in the movie. They didn't want me to be more like myself, how I would preach it. But my granddaddy always preached the word. He quoted scripture, and that's why my granddaddy was always known, the Bible says, the Bible says, the Bible says, because that was the authority for him to preach. And so that's what my granddaddy always preached. And
the snow returned with a vengeance today, but fortunately, it won't be sticking around long. Well, weather details are coming up. Cold and snowy today. Tonight, more snow developing with a low near -15. Tomorrow, high pressure system returns, bringing lots of sunshine and a high near +1. Sunday, even warmer with a mercury climbing to 5. Monday, more blue sky, sunshine, and a high again near 5 degrees. Tuesday, it warms up to 8. Wednesday, Environment Canada is calling for the temperature to increase to 14 degrees. The meltdown is on. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 4 degrees and an average low of -8. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1943 at 19 degrees, and the record low was a very cold -31 in 1959. Sunrise was at 7:45, sunset at 4:48. Let's have a look at the national forecast for tomorrow now. Vancouver will be mainly sunny at 8, Victoria slightly warmer at 9. Calgary will have lots of sunshine and 3 degrees on Saturday. Edmonton will be partly cloudy and -2. Cooler in Regina under a mainly clear sky and -7. Saskatoon will have lots of sunshine but a chilly -9. Even cooler in Winnipeg tomorrow at -11. Over in the central part of our nation, Toronto will be rainy and +4. Ottawa will have a mixture of sun and cloud and 2. A slight chance of flurries and 3 degrees is on tap for Montreal. Fredericton, New Brunswick had a snowfall warning today. Tomorrow clearing and a high near 2. Halifax, Nova Scotia will be mainly overcast and 2. Charlottetown, PEI had a snowfall warning as well today. More of the white stuff tomorrow and a high of only 2 degrees. And in St. John's, Newfoundland tomorrow, they're expecting periods of rain and a high near 6. Canadian oil prices have plummeted in recent months. Industry analysts say it is thanks to a pipeline bottleneck that has led to higher inventories. The extra oil has forced producers to export an increasing amount of crude by rail and truck. Alberta produced more than 110 million barrels of oil in August. Stats Canada says that is nearly 20 million barrels more than 2 years ago. With the oil glut, there has been calls to curtail production. The chief executive at Cenovus Energy, one of our country's largest oil companies, urged the Alberta government to step in and force producers to cut their output to help prop up prices. A new report says the Government of Canada will be committing $153 million to the vegan food industry. The Fed said in a news release that they would be investing millions into vegan protein, creating more options for vegans to enjoy a plant-based diet. Some of that investment will be tied to Protein Industries Canada Supercluster. It's a nonprofit value chain involved with food manufacturing, agriculture, and food-related services. The initiative is expected to create 4,500 jobs and bring $4.5 billion to the Canadian economy over the next 10 years. Canada Post employees are continuing their rotating strike action despite a recent offer from the Crown Corporation. Our parliamentary reporter Ray Fillion says the mail is piling up.
Canada Post says some 375 trucks across the country have yet to be unloaded. And obviously with Christmas being the Christmas season and the busy online shopping season being just around the corner, something is going to have to give. On Wednesday afternoon, Canada Post made an offer. We don't know yet if it's a final offer to the union. The union has until midnight Saturday night to accept it.
Watch my full interview with Monsieur Filion as we discuss if Ottawa may introduce back-to-work legislation for Canada Post. That's coming up after business news. Imagine cows that can withstand hotter temperatures or pigs that never reach puberty. A company based in St. Paul, Minnesota wants to alter farm animals by adding and subtracting genetic traits in a lab. Well, it may sound like science fiction. The company Recombinetics says it needs to convince regulators that gene-edited animals are no different than ones bred conventionally. The company says it is promoting the gene-edited traits in a way to ease animal suffering. Animal welfare advocates have criticized farmers in the past for using hot irons to dehorn dairy cows so the animals don't hurt each other. Recombinetics says it snips out the gene for growing horns, so the procedure is unnecessary. Now here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Alberta's Education Minister David Eggen says his government will be pulling funding to 28 private schools, including Christian schools, who refuse to support gay-straight alliances. Eggen says that translates to about $32.5 million worth of funding. When you see news happening, drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of today's top stories, check out our full newscast online at bridgecitynews.ca. Ottawa is thinking of introducing back-to-work legislation for Canada Post employees. Our parliamentary reporter Ray Filion has details next. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Come and enjoy a Victorian Prairie Christmas on Friday, November 16th from 1 to 4 p.m. at Galt Historic Railway Park near Sterling, Alberta. Experience an 1890s Christmas setting with entertainment, food, and Victorian Christmas pudding. Cost is $20 per person or $18 per person for a group of 5 or more. To reserve your spot, call Pat at 403-394-9434. The 4th annual Pig Roast fundraiser in support of the construction of a medical clinic in Uganda is taking place Saturday, November 17th at the Miss City Church, with doors opening at 5 p.m., supper and program beginning at 5:30. Tickets are $15 and can be reserved by calling Anne at the Bridges of Hope office at 403-380-3844. Volunteer Lethbridge is looking for individuals and groups to support them at their annual holiday gift wrapping fundraiser at Park Place Shopping Centre during November and December. Come for this fun and festive opportunity to help Volunteer Lethbridge's activities and services in the community. Orientation will be provided. For more information, call Chelsea at 403-332-4320. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
Canada finally has a new trade deal with the United States and Mexico. Now we just have to work on those steel and aluminum tariffs. Joining me now from Ottawa is our parliamentary reporter Ray Filion. Ray, our Prime Minister and U.S. President Donald Trump had a recent discussion about those tariffs. Any good news for our steel and aluminum industry?
Not yet, unfortunately. Yeah, you're right. Justin Trudeau and Donald Trump had a quick encounter in Paris last weekend. The two were there for the commemorations of the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I. And Justin Trudeau said this week that nonetheless, even though those tariffs are still in place, he says he's still hopeful that they could be lifted in time for the big signing ceremony, which is set to take place in Buenos Aires at the end of this month on the margins of the G20 summit. That's where Canada, the United States, and Mexico are set to sign the new USMCA, the new deal that was reached at the end of September. We don't know yet who's going to be representing Canada. Will it be Justin Trudeau if the tariffs are still in place? But the fact of the matter is, we don't know if the tariffs will be lifted or not. And you can feel that Canada is growing increasingly impatient about this. The Foreign Affairs Minister held a series of meetings with the press this week. She also visited some steel plants in Ontario. And she said, look, it's not a negotiation. Canada wants those tariffs lifted because there's been some talk that the Americans would like to have something in exchange, probably some sort of quota system that would limit the amounts of steel and aluminum that Canada would be able to export to the United States. She says Canada wants none of that. She said it's not a negotiation. So we'll have to see what happens. Justin Trudeau was also asked overseas this week what Canada would be willing to give the Americans in exchange for the removal of those tariffs. And he wouldn't get into it. He simply said that Canada doesn't want to negotiate in public. So we'll see what happens. The tariffs are still there. We just don't know when or if they're going to be removed.
Now, you referenced the USMCA, and let's talk a little bit about that trade deal. It may face another hurdle as the Democrats in D.C. want changes. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, because the Democrats have seized control of the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C., thanks to the midterm elections. And as you probably know, Democrats tend to look a little less favorably toward free trade compared to their Republican cousins. And there's even a senior Democrat in New Jersey who is in line right now to have a senior role in the new Congress, who said this week that changes would probably have to be required in order for the Democrats to sign off on the deal. He said that changes would be required in terms of legislation, in terms of enforcement, especially over labor and environmental rules. So, as I mentioned, the deal is set to be signed in Buenos Aires at the end of this month. But after that, there's the whole ratification process. So the Parliament here in Canada, the one in Mexico, and obviously the Senate and the House of Representatives in DC would need to be involved. So there's a lot of people here in Ottawa who are starting to think that, maybe we're probably going to have to deal with more drama. The Americans, some Democrats might want to reopen the deal and renegotiate some parts. So, yeah, we're still a few miles away from the USMCA becoming into force, apparently.
Now, Ray, we had a bit of a recent surprise recently when Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was seen giving a thumbs up to Russian President Vladimir Putin when they met in Paris.
That was kind of surprising because we know that Justin Trudeau has been a very vocal critic of Russia in the past few years. There's been Ukraine, Syria, the whole series of sanctions that the Russians slapped on Chrystia Freeland, his foreign affairs minister. Believe it or not, she's Canada's foreign affairs minister, but thanks to those sanctions, she's not even allowed to set foot in Russia. So it's kind of surprising to see Mr. Trudeau being all friendly with the Russian president. They were together at the Peace Summit, an initiative of the French president last weekend. They were side by side. They were seen joking together, exchanging smiles. And at some point, Mr. Trudeau flashed a thumbs up toward Mr. Putin. He was asked about it at a news conference a few hours later. He said, look, Russia and Mr. Putin know really well where Canada stands on issues like Russia, Syria, and the whole thing. But that was a peace summit. And he said he was glad to see Russia being represented by its president. So that was the essence of the conversation, according to Justin Trudeau. Mr. Trudeau said, I have been unequivocal and will continue to be with Russia when it comes to Ukraine. This was, he said, a moment to highlight the fact that the world was coming together for peace. So the discussions were about global peace, so that's why he was being friendly with Mr. Putin. They didn't talk about Syria and Ukraine.
Now, our Prime Minister recently confirmed that there is an audio recording of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi's death.
Absolutely, and he became the first Western leader to confirm the existence of those tapes. This story all began last Saturday when the Turkish president, Mr. Erdogan, told the world that the last few moments of Jamal Khashoggi's life had been recorded. There's an audio recorded, he says, was shared by his country's officials with officials from other countries like Saudi Arabia, the United States, and France. And on Monday morning, interestingly enough, the French foreign affairs minister was on television. He was being interviewed about it. And he said that he had no clue if those tapes really existed. Then came Justin Trudeau in Paris at a news conference confirming the existence of those of that particular recording. He said that Canada had been fully briefed up on the content of those recordings. He said he hadn't heard the recordings, but we learned from CSIS in a very rare statement, Canada's Secret Services made a statement this week saying that David Vigneault, the CEO of CSIS, actually traveled to Turkey in the last couple of weeks, where he listened to the tapes and then briefed the Prime Minister on their content. So quite an interesting story. Yeah, Justin Trudeau becoming the first Western leader to confirm the existence of those tapes. His Foreign Affairs Minister repeated once again this week that Canada has not made up its mind yet on whether or not Canada will slap sanctions on Saudi Arabia over the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. No word on how Canada will punish Saudi Arabia, if at all, although she's thinking, she said on Thursday, about some sanctions for some Saudi officials.
Now, the Canada Post strike is dragging on with rotating strikes across the country. Ray, there is word that the feds are going to intervene.
Yeah, Justin Trudeau said as much about a week ago. He said that he's losing patience because those rotating strikes that we've seen in many cities across the country are starting to have an effect. Canada Post says some 375 trucks across the country have yet to be unloaded. And obviously with Christmas being the Christmas season and the busy online shopping season being just around the corner, something is going to have to give. On Wednesday afternoon, Canada Post made an offer. We don't know yet if it's a final offer to the union. The union has until midnight Saturday night to accept it. And if they reject it, well, we don't know what's going to happen, although it looks increasingly likely that the federal government is going to step in, perhaps with special legislation to make sure that everybody goes back to work, that those parcels get to be delivered on time for Christmas.
Now, just as we finished talking about the sexual misconduct of former Tory MP Tony Clement, comes word that some of the military personnel have been kicked out of the armed forces for sexual misconduct of their own.
Yeah, that's right. 74 Canadian Forces members have been kicked out of the military between August 2015 and September of this year. Another 47, we're told, have lost their position of authority following complaints of inappropriate sexual behavior. This is according to documents that were tabled in the House of Commons recently. You'll recall that the leadership of the Canadian Forces have this new policy in place. It's called Operation Honor. It's a zero tolerance policy when it comes to sexual harassment, inappropriate sexual behavior. And since then, we're told that there have been 147 investigations. Prosecutors have recommended charges be brought against 46 members of the Canadian Armed Forces. 16 trials have been completed. 11 accused have been found guilty of sexual assault or other crimes. So things are moving, although some say it takes too long from the time a complaint is filed to the trial actually taking place. We're told it takes on average 134 days. So according to critics, that's way too long. Things need to be sped up. What's interesting about this is that we have these numbers now, but the Auditor General is going to table a much awaited report in the House of Commons on this coming Tuesday on Operation Honor to see if it's a complete report that looked at whether or not the military did their work, the proper work when it comes to protecting Canadian Forces members from bad sexual behaviors.
Ray, as you know, many of us here in Western Canada lean a little towards the right. So it might be a little disappointing to us, or even surprising to hear that in a recent poll, Justin Trudeau and the Liberals are poised to win another majority next year. I thought maybe Andrew Scheer was making some headway.
Yeah, but according to the latest poll, which was conducted over the past couple of weeks by Mainstream Research, the Liberals are poised to form another majority government. It says 39.3% of Canadian voters intend to vote Liberal, 34.6% for the Conservatives. The NDP is polling in at 10.8%. That's very low, and that's actually helping the Liberals. It's bad news for the Conservatives. The Greens are at 6.8%. Maxime Bernier's brand new party, the People's Party of Canada, has 3.8% support across the country, according to Main Street. So, yeah, the pollster says that the Liberals, if those numbers, if an election were held today, the Liberals would win a big majority once again. But obviously, the election is still 11 months away, so a lot of things are probably going to happen between now and then. But things are looking good for Justin Trudeau right now.
You know, it's interesting. If Maxime Bernier hadn't broken away, that 3.5%, you add that to the Tories, and we might be looking neck and neck, right? Almost a tie between the two parties.
Probably, yeah, exactly. The fact that the NDP is polling in at only 10.8% is bad news for the Conservatives. But yeah, Maxime Bernier is not helping their cause either.
So do you think Jagmeet Singh is he potentially being viewed as a weak leader? Is that what's really bringing down the NDP and their popularity?
I think so. I think that he's not helping the cause, that's for sure. And we're hearing rumblings that, there could be maybe another leadership race if things don't improve between now and the spring. There could be another leadership race within the NDP. We'll have to wait and see. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has yet to call the by-election in Burnaby South, which is where Mr. Singh wants to run to finally have a seat in Parliament. And as we discussed last week, Mr. Trudeau could technically and legally wait until March to call that by-election. So he's in no rush.
Ray, Finance Minister Bill Morneau will be tabling a much-awaited economic update. Tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah, it's going to be a mini budget. Some people are calling it a mini budget. We're told that there will be some interesting measures in that economic update, especially for the business community. As you know, the business community in Canada has been complaining that there's an imbalance right now. Canada used to be at an advantage when it comes to business taxes compared to the United States. Our business tax rate used to be 8% lower than that in the US, but obviously following changes made by President Trump, business taxes are now 6% higher now here in Canada compared to the US. So some worry Canada will be at a disadvantage. If you're a foreign company looking to invest in North America, why would you want to set up shop on this side of the border when business tax rates are lower in the States? So there might be some goodies for companies. We're hearing that they could be targeted measures to try and help companies here in Canada. There could be some goodies as well for taxpayers. So we're gonna see what it's all about on Wednesday. It's going to be tabled at 4 p.m. Eastern time in the House of Commons. We're also going to get on Wednesday at that time the latest deficit projection. So that's going to be something that the opposition Conservatives are going to likely focus on. As you know, Justin Trudeau is running deficits much higher than he said he would in the last election campaign.
In light of what transpired between U.S. President Donald Trump and CNN White House correspondent Jim Acosta, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and other world leaders signed a letter in favor of freedom of the press. But Ray, will this actually do anything?
Well, that's the big question, and right now we're not getting any answers. You're right. That letter was made public earlier this week. It was signed by Justin Trudeau, the French president, and other world leaders, leaders from Norway, Costa Rica, Tunisia, etc. It says, and I quote, "The freedom of opinion and expression, a cornerstone of any strong and healthy democracy, is in danger. They know that journalists are being threatened, misinformation is spreading." He said, they're saying in the letter that something needs to be done. The question is what? We asked many people, including the Foreign Affairs Minister, Chrystia Freeland, this week. No answers. So a lot of nice principles in this letter, but we're still waiting to see what will transpire in terms of action from Canada.
Threatening journalists, you don't have to look any further than what happened to Jamal Khashoggi. There you go, Ray.
Sure, yeah.
Our parliamentary reporter, Ray Fillion, joining me once again from Ottawa. Thanks a lot, Ray.
You're welcome, Hal.
We are seeing more and more faith-based movies being produced in recent years. Now, we're excited to be joined today by Reverend Will Graham, Vice President of the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association and Billy Graham's grandson, the oldest son of Franklin Graham. And he's also one of the actors in the movie Unbroken, Path to Redemption. Now, if that name rings a bell, it's because it's a continuation of the 2014 blockbuster film Unbroken, which was directed by Angelina Jolie. So, Reverend Will, thanks for making time for us today. Let me ask you first off, are faith-based movies having an impact? Are they influencing our society?
Yes, and this is a good point right here. Yes, it is happening. They are having an impact, but here's the thing. The movie that we're talking about right now, Unbroken, Path to Redemption, is not a faith-based movie. That's what's unusual. But because of the faith-based success, Hollywood has now turned to that and started looking at that. This is a Universal Pictures movie. It's not a Christian movie, but here's the thing. The producer who produced the first movie, Matt Baer, his name's Matt Baer, he produced this movie as well, but he wanted a Christian to capture it as a director. So he hired the director, Harold Kronk, who did the movie God's Not Dead 1 and God's Not Dead 2, who is a Christian director and was able to capture those important Christian elements in this movie. So it's very much spiritual, it's very much Christian. It's just not done by the faith-based community. It's actually done by Hollywood.
Right, okay, that's really interesting to note. Now, this movie actually picks up after the original movie, Unbroken, which, for those who aren't familiar with the film, features the real-life story of Louis Zamperini, a troubled kid. He becomes a U.S. Olympic athlete, later joins the Air Force in World War II, crashes an amazing journey there, drifts at sea for 47 days, only to end up captured and tortured as a prisoner of war in Japan. So, can you give us a bit of a snapshot of the rest of the life story your movie covers? Because the second half of his life takes some twists and turns, doesn't it?
It does. The first movie ends right when he comes home from captivity. He hugs his mom and dad in Long Beach, California. And you think, okay, that's a great story. It ends right there. He made it home. But in reality, this is when everything started to fall apart in his life. Now, he would end up having nightmares. He had PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And this is what happens to a lot of veterans when they come back, both Canadian and American soldiers deal with this. And because of that, he started to self-medicate through alcohol. He became an alcoholic. He became a drunk. And during that time, he would get married. He would have a child. He couldn't find work. And his life started spinning out of control. And he was bent on going back to Japan to murder the man who tortured him all these years. His nickname is the Bird. And but out of desperation, he and his wife would come to know Jesus Christ by listening to my grandfather in 1949. And so, and then the movie would end with him going back to Japan to face his captors and how he knew for sure that God had changed his life. So, and I'm going to give you a little extras right now. You're going to stay tuned when you see the end of the movie. Don't turn it off. Don't turn your TV off. But keep watching because you're going to see some real-life photos of my grandfather and Louis Zamperini. You're going to hear Louis Zamperini give his real testimony at Billy Graham's crusade a number of years later. And so there's some great little clips still yet to come after the movie is over. So don't turn it off too early, all right?
That's good to know. Yeah, you don't want to leave the theater early, right? Okay. Now, you get to play the role of your grandpa in the film. I mean, now he and your dad, Franklin, are preachers, and so are you. But how difficult was it to switch to acting, first of all, in a big film when you're used to being the preacher?
Well, it is. The one thing that was good about this, because I am a preacher and I am an evangelist, it became very natural for me. What was unnatural was doing it not necessarily in front of a camera, but with a director. Because, as a preacher, you have one take. Once you say it, it's done. It's kind of like this interview. Whatever I say, it's stuck, all right? But when you're doing it in front of a director, he'll just say, cut, we'll do this over. You're slurring your words. You mispronounce. Do it again. You have no passion. Whatever it is, he makes you do it over and over and over again. And so that was a little bit nerve-wracking. And I was definitely a fish out of water. Acting's not normal for me. I'm not really acting, but the acting process is different. I've done it in front of cameras. I've done it on live television sets and stuff like that. But doing it when you got like a big green screen in front of you sometimes and different things, or they're not micing you, they just want hand gestures, it becomes a little bit difficult, a little bit different, but not bad, just different.
Okay, so you got to preach some of your grandpa's sermons back to 1949. You got to be, pretend to be him. And of course, you already knew what he was like growing up and so forth. But did you learn anything new about either your granddaddy or even about yourself by doing this?
Well, that's a great question because, there's a lot of things I knew about my granddaddy and I know a lot about him. So I'm not sure if I learned a whole bunch different about my grandfather. But my grandfather preached a lot different in 1949 than he did in 1999. They called him machine gun the machine gun preacher, the machine gun Billy, because he would just preach, I mean, so quick, and he would hardly take a breath, and he was on to the next sentence and on to the next sentence and on to the next sentence. He never took a breath. I mean, it was just, he just kept on going. And 1999, half a century later, he was a lot more slower and a lot more deliberate. The same message and all that, but it was a lot faster. It was interesting. They didn't want me to preach just like that in the movie. They didn't want me to be more like myself, how I would preach it. But my granddaddy always preached the word. He quoted scripture. And that's why my granddaddy was always known, the Bible says, the Bible says, the Bible says, because that was the authority for him to preach. And so that's what my granddaddy always preached. And I tell you, it was a lot of fun preaching my granddaddy, but he used a lot of phrases that I would never use in my sermons. Just a different language, different type of language.
But you know what? It seems to me that, for that time, though, that era, he was contemporary for that time. And the people heard and related to his messages. I mean, otherwise he wouldn't have had the success that he did, I think. So now in real life, Zamperini, you mentioned earlier, he struggles with hatred for his captors, right? And turns to alcohol and so forth. And the big part, of course, is when his wife Cynthia becomes a believer at a Billy Graham crusade. And then I think she kind of drags him along later on as well, right? So, that's a crucial turning point in his life. And at some point, he has to forgive people who have deeply, deeply hurt him. And again, for I think a lot of us, that's a hard thing to do. I mean, people suffer sexual abuse, divorce, all kinds of things, right? How long did it take Zamperini to work through forgiving those who had abused him for so long?
Well, it was interesting because we actually have some of that testimony. When you watch the movie and you kind of watch right after the movie, it's not necessarily the extras, it's going through the credits. You'll see some of his own testimony where he talks literally about this. But when he gave his life to Christ there in October of 1949, it was instantaneous. And he knew that his life had changed because he no longer hated his captors, but now he loved them. And so when he comes to 1950, and that's where the movie will end in 1950, when he goes back and he meets them face to face, and he said, I'll know for sure what God did in my life was true or not, that when I look at my captors, whether I hate them or whether I love them. And when he saw them face to face, he had nothing but love. And he knew for certain that God had changed his life because the only thing he wanted to do was to kill these individuals. And he hated these men. And now he loved them and he told them about Jesus Christ and how Christ can change their life.
So this is, for clarity here, he actually goes back then to like these Japanese prisoners who are still in a prisoner of war camp, I understand, and visits them.
Yeah, that's right. This is the same camp that he was in.
Oh, wow.
Now it's reversed. The Americans control it. They put all the guards, except the one guard that tortured them all this year. His nickname was Bird, Watanabe, and he was never captured. All the other ones were captured and placed in this old prison that Louis stayed in. So Louis went exactly back to the same place that he was captive and talked to the same guards that had beat him and mistreated him. But the one that was instrumental, Watanabe, escaped. He was never caught. He was never prosecuted, and he never was paid for his crimes. He was later forgiven by the American government. And they said no more trials and stuff like that. And so Watanabe just lived a normal life the rest of his life. But Louis would find him in 1996. They never met in person, but wrote him a letter and told him about how much what you did to me was wrong. But let me tell you, Christ, I hated you, but Christ changed my life and Christ can change your life. And Louis was still trying to witness to Watanabe even at the age of 90 years old or 80 years old, however old he was.
Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, I think he lived to 97, right? At least
that's right.
Zamperini. So, okay. And did any of the POWs, the Japanese POWs, what was their response? I mean, did any of them actually come to Christ out of this, or?
I think some probably did come to know Christ. I don't know, the movie won't show it, but I think in real life some of them did respond to Christ and some didn't. The Japanese culture is very hard. The Japanese don't understand the Christian faith very well. God is something they don't have in their concept. So it's something that's very foreign to Japanese people. It's very hard to communicate the gospel in Japan. And we'll see people come to know Christ, but for Louis, I'm not sure if it happened that time or other times he went back. But he had a great impact on a lot of people.
Well, for sure. So now Louis Zamperini actually at some point does become an evangelist, correct?
That's correct. He'll spend the rest of his days, maybe not as a professional evangelist like Billy Graham or something like that, but he would take especially young, troubled kids, just like he was when he was a youngster, and he would take them out and teach them life skills, and then he would kind of talk to them like, listen, you know, you need Christ in your life. Christ can change your life just like he changed mine. He can change you and give you hope in life. And so he would have a profound impact on the inner city kids of Los Angeles.
That is awesome. And understand his family is actually continuing that through the generations as well, just like your family is doing. So that's neat to see. Did he have an ongoing relationship with your grandfather, Billy Graham, at all, Louis?
Yeah, they say longtime friends. Matter of fact, that Louis would come back and go on to my granddad's crusades years afterwards. He would come and give his testimony years later. One of the last things we found was a letter that my grandfather wrote Louis. This would be around 2004, 2005-ish. I can't remember the exact date of this letter. And my grandmother was sick in bed. This is Ruth Graham. She was sick, and this was getting close to the very end of her life. She was pretty much bedridden, and so she would watch movies, Christian movies. And her favorite movie, one of her favorite movies, was Chariots of Fire. And my granddaddy's writing in this to Louis. He said, I'm watching Chariots of Fire for the third time today. I'm getting sick of it. He said, so we got sick of it, so we went and put it on, we put your movie in. This is the movie that the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association did on Louis' life. And both my grandmother and my granddaddy remember the story of Louis, and they said, this is such a powerful movie that Hollywood needs to do a major movie picture on your life. This is 2004. And so my granddaddy said, with your permission, I would like to talk to some producers out there and producing your life story, because it's one of the greatest stories of forgiveness outside the Bible. And so even my granddaddy saw the potential of this movie. So even in the early 2000s, they were still communicating, writing back and forth. And Louis would come to see my grandfather, I think around 2011, after the movie not the movie, but the book Unbroken was written by Laura Hillenbrand. And he would bring his book by, and they visited for the final time there at my granddad's house. And I tell you, it was a different scene. My granddaddy's sitting there and goes, Louis, we're getting so old. And Louis like, well, I feel fine. And my granddaddy, he's like, he can hardly move. And Louis just doing like push-ups and sit-ups and jogging around my granddaddy. My granddaddy was younger. He couldn't believe how much energy Louis had.
Let me just ask you in wrapping up here, what do you hope people will take home from this movie here? Now, by the way, the DVD coming out December 11th, so people can get it in time for Christmas as well and pass it on to people who want to see it. So, yeah, I mean, what do you think people should take home from this?
Well, it is, and it comes out December 11th on DVD. On November 27th, you can get it as a digital download, like iTunes or something like that if you want to. I've already pre-ordered mine. But here's the thing I want people to understand. There's a lot more Louis out there. Matter of fact, maybe one of your listeners right now is a Louis. What do I mean by that? Maybe you're angry at God. You feel like God's against you. Maybe things are spiraling out of control, your marriage, your job, your career, whatever it is, your life is falling apart. You're upset with God. Maybe you're addicted to drugs or alcohol. You're a Louis in life. And I'm here to tell you that Christ will forgive you of your sin. Christ can give you a new life, a new beginning. He did it for Louis. If he can change Louis' life, he can change your life. And God's the only hope that you can find in this world. And he's the one that made you. He's the one that loves you. And he's the one that's been pursuing you. And Louis has been trying to outrun God his whole life, but he couldn't outrun God. God's been chasing him the whole time. And I'm here to tell you, God's chasing after you. And he's catching up to you, and he wants to come into your life. He's knocking on the door of your heart. Let him in. Let Christ come into your life. He will change your life. And this movie is a perfect example of how God can change somebody.
All right. Unbroken path of redemption here. So thank you so much, Will. Much appreciated.
Yeah, great to see you guys again. Look forward to seeing you in person sometime.
Absolutely. Will Graham with the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thank you so much for watching.